New York and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning, beautiful Laura Styles, Rosenberg. Give it up for Nikole Hannah-Jones. I don't even know if you're of the New York Times, but you
I am.
So you work for the New York Times, but you specifically led this mission for the 1619 Project, a special project to not only articulate but commemorate the 400th year of when slave trade started here in America, in the United States, which some people get confused because slaves were brought to the Caribbean and other places before this. But this commemorates specifically when it started becoming the thing to build America, correct?
Right. So in August of 1619 is when the first group of Africans were sold into the British colony of Virginia. And of course, that is the foundation of what goes on to become America. So it's not that there were no Africans ever. There were some in what was Florida and Spanish-controlled Florida. There were certainly Africans who were sold into slavery in the Caribbean. But the start of it in what would become America is 1619 in Virginia.
One of the, I think, most important pieces of the whole thing, there's a lot of it, but right now, seeing where our country is and dealing with what some people are calling new lows, right? From the current president to, mass murder from guns.
Some people say the country's been made great again. So I guess it just depends on your perspective.
It depends on, right.
Yeah.
And so Black folks were the group that held America accountable for its promises on paper. That has been, the plight of us here in this country, since the beginning. And that's really detailed in here. Yeah. And I think it's very powerful because I don't think others who have benefited from the work that Black people have brought to this nation in accountability give us the credit for it, or even understand what has been happening.
For sure. So what the project is trying to do is really reframe the way that we think about the country, but also the way we have thought about Black Americans in general. From the beginning, we've been treated as a problem. Abraham Lincoln called Black people a troublesome presence. And the troublesome presence is we give lie to the entire foundation myth of this country. The foundation myth is that we were born out of the colonists' quest for freedom. We are a nation built on the equality of man and inalienable rights. But as we know, at that time, 1/5 of the population was held in complete bondage, and including by most of the founding fathers. So
every writer of that document had slaves.
Nearly every one of them. And certainly while Thomas Jefferson is writing the Declaration of Independence, his enslaved brother-in-law is sitting next to him to make him comfortable. So every time this country sees Black people, we're reminded that we're the only group who didn't choose to come here, that we, again, give lie to our founding myth, and you can see much of the racism that Black Americans still have to deal with is stemming from that discomfort.
Do you think there's any path to which America can sort of exercise the demon that is slavery as an institution?
No. Probably not. I mean, part of what we're saying is when something is in the very DNA of something,
right.
Which slavery is in the DNA of this country, 150 years before we even decide we want to be America, we've had the institution of slavery here. How does one purge genetics from your body?
Well said.
Now, certainly, we could try to cure certain aspects of it, but there's such a denial. I mean, the whole reason we had to do this project is most people have never heard the year 1619. Most people don't want to learn about slavery. We're not taught slavery very well in schools. If you look at the special section of the newspaper tries to be a corrective to say, why are we taught this so poorly? And this is actually the truth of it. So if we can't even acknowledge the truth of that slavery was the institution upon which our economic prosperity was built, our political system, our culture, then how do we go on to then fix the legacy of it?
When you came in, you were like, this is the blackest thing the New York Times has ever seen,
yeah,
right?
For sure. Well, ever done.
Done, right? How did, can you just tell me like how you came up with the idea? How did this come together? And what was the reaction when you presented it and you were super passionate about it?
Sure. I've literally been obsessed with the year 1619 since I was in high school. And I read a book by a scholar named Lerone Bennett, and it was called Before the Mayflower. And it opens with, that year. I think on the 29th page is when you see that year. And I just remember being struck by that I had never heard that we arrived here that early, that we arrived here before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, and understood that there was a reason we weren't taught that. So I've thought about this for a long time, and as the 400th anniversary was approaching, I just kept thinking 400 years is a long time, and this is such a significant institution, and it's going to pass in most American households without anyone even knowing it's something that we should commemorate, or most households not even knowing 1619 ever happened. So I decided to go to my boss at the magazine, Jake Silverstein, and pitch that we should dedicate an entire issue of the magazine just to looking at the legacy. And if you read it, it's actually, the magazine is not about the past. The magazine takes modern phenomenon and traces them back to slavery, because as you all know, what we hear all the time is that slavery ended 150 years ago. Why are you still talking about it? The magazine answers that question because it says if you look at why we have so much traffic in Atlanta, why we consume so much sugar, why we're the only Western industrialized nation without universal health care, why we still have so many health disparities, our democracy itself, the political dysfunction we see happening in D.C. right now, you can trace all of this back to slavery. That's really the power of what we're trying to do, is show that we have not been able to leave that legacy behind. And if you think the year 1776 matters, then the year 1619 matters as well. We can't pick and choose which parts of our history matter and which ones don't. In terms of the reaction, I thought I was going to have to do a lot more convincing than I did. But as soon as I pitched it, my editor was like, we absolutely should. And the project ended up being much larger than even what I imagined.
And it's continuing, right? This was the first issue. So how is it going to continue? What are people going to be getting?
So we're going to continue to publish parts of this project throughout the year. We have a podcast launching called the 1619. It's just called 1619. It's going to launch on Friday. There's still lots of stories, right? I mean, you can dedicate 100 pages of the magazine. You could do a whole special section and still not cover everything. One thing that didn't get in the issue that I think is really important is to ask then, if this is true, if we're still suffering from this legacy, what is owed to the descendants of those who were enslaved, and we haven't done that story yet. So there's still lots of stories that are going to roll out. We're also having a live event, an all-day symposium at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in D.C. on October 30th. That is really going to try to bring everything together, and that will be the culmination. On
reparations, and that kind of has moved into, I think in my lifetime, I've never seen it discussed by presidents at debates. You know, as you're watching it, what are you feeling and thinking, these discussions? Some I think have been dismissive and disrespectful, and I've been disappointed in some candidates. Others I think are trying to be more thoughtful. What are you saying?
I mean, it is progress that, as you said, anyone who is a serious contender for the office of the presidency is even considering it. But even then, most of those who are considering it are trying to push these race-neutral, class-based approaches. And you cannot
that disappointed me about Bernie specifically, and Kamala.
Yeah, he's kind of one note on that, and now my mentions are going to get crazy. But this is, again, kind of dealing with our inability to deal with race and, like, our founding caste system. You cannot fix a racialized system of caste with simply race-neutral economic programs. So I really would like if we could have candidates feel liberated enough to talk specifically about what is owed to Black Americans who have a particular history. No one else was forced to come here. No one else was had to exist under chattel slavery and 100 years of racial apartheid. And if you look at the conditions that many Black Americans are in today, it's not simply about class. There's a reason Black people are disproportionately poor. There's a reason why even middle-class Black people are living actually in more impoverished neighborhoods than poor white people. Poor white people actually have more wealth than middle-class Black people. So this is not simply an issue of class. It is an issue of race.
What does that mean?
And those candidates are not dealing with that.
Poor white people have more wealth than Black people?
Yes,
than
middle-class Black people.
So meaning people who are economically lower because of their race and being white in America are actually have more wealth. What does that mean?
So we have to understand the difference between income and wealth. So income is what your paycheck comes, what the paycheck you earn every week. Wealth is that which is passed down in property or inheritance or in your bank account. And so because of the way that Black people were denied the ability to both gain wealth during slavery, but then after slavery, 98% of the federally insured loans that went out during right after the Great Depression went to white people. So black people were literally kept out of the largest driver of wealth creation in this country, both during slavery and after. So what that means is you have lower income white people who actually have inherited wealth, and that you have higher income black people who have no inherited wealth whatsoever. There's no property to pass on. There's no wealth to pass on. And what that does is it gives then those lower income white people access to neighborhoods, to schools that even wealthier black people don't have access to.
Right.
Because they can't come up, for instance, with a down payment for a house. I mean, I could think of my own life. I made very good income, but I couldn't buy in a lot of neighborhoods because my parents could not write me a check to put a down payment on in the house. But I would see other white Americans who, one was a nurse and one was a freelance photographer, and the mom gave them the $200,000 down payment on a house. This is kind of the way that the systemic quality of racism is passed down, even when black people manage somehow to get a college degree and to make high income.
When in America right now, you have black folks who are having a hard time, because they're not taught. Culturally, it's not a part of a lot of our homes, this information, right? You have Caribbean folks, right, who see themselves as black, and they are black, but they're not black Americans, and as you pointed out earlier in our convo, opted to come to mainland for opportunity and things like that. There's a psychology in there that I don't think a lot of people understand, just that power dynamic of saying, my home is Trinidad. My home and cultural home is Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Brazil, versus a black American who is psychologically and emotionally just tied to mainland plantation American slavery. Do you guys delve into that psychology in this project and kind of like that more than trauma, but weight almost?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote the opening essay for the whole project, and it should be clear, this project is an education for white folks, but it's also an education for black folks. And the opening essay, I kind of describe it really as a love song to our people, which is to say that we are raised, as you know, as black people in America, to somehow be ashamed that our story starts here with our enslavement. That we have to try to come up with some false connection. Not that we're not connected to Africa, but most of us have never been there. We couldn't tell you where we're from there, and that this was something to be ashamed of. What my essay argues is that, we are people who were born on the water. We were born in the Middle Passage, and we created out of the most hellish situation our own original culture, and we should be completely proud of that. And no one should tell us that we don't have a right to claim the American flag, that we don't have a right to be patriotic, because the role that black people have served in this country is we actually took the founding ideals literally as the founders were writing them, and know that they didn't actually believe in them, and they didn't think they applied to most Americans.
It was marketing for the rest of the world.
It was and they have these conversations. That's how they codify slavery in the Constitution without ever mentioning the word slavery, even though they all know that that's what they're doing. But black folks looked at those words that Thomas Jefferson wrote and that they wrote in the Constitution and said, we actually believe them. And black people have resisted and tried to make those ideals true, really from the time we landed on these shores. I argue that we have been the perfecters of this democracy, and that we're really the greatest culture and the most American culture that has been produced here. And so we should stop being ashamed. Yes, we should try to find our connections to the motherland where we can, but really this is our ancestral home. And I'm arguing in that piece that all other groups should actually be thankful to the presence of black Americans. The rights struggles that black Americans have led, almost always alone, dying alone, fighting alone, has led to every other successful rights struggle, from disability rights to women's rights to immigration rights. The reason so many black and brown people can even immigrate to the United States is because the civil rights movement ended racist quotas in the immigration system that prevented black and brown people from coming here. So it is an irony then that those very people who were able to come here because of our rights struggles then come here and want to distance themselves from black Americans. So what I'm hoping is people will read this and have a different respect for the role that black people have played, for the 40 million descendants who are testament to the role we have played, but that we will also have a different way of seeing ourselves. And I think that's been what so many black folks who have read it have reacted to, is that they said, I feel seen and I feel a sense of pride, where before we've always been taught that we should be ashamed that we were enslaved here, and we should not.
You know, the conversation around slavery often happens from. But I see it from black people and white people where they talk about the African nations that participated in the slave trade and that actually traded for money and, you know, other business endeavors, the black folks that were on the Middle Passage. And the concept of slavery did not start in 1619, right? Slavery existed. There were white slaves that came to America, people who were working for free for their life.
They were not white slaves in America.
Well, indentured servants.
Yeah.
Indentured servants. Excuse me. Indentured servants.
And those were people who chose to enter into a contract to bond their labor, which
right.
is very different from being sold into slavery.
But also on that is the reality that chattel slavery is different
Exactly.
than slavery that the world had seen before.
Exactly.
And is that discussed in this magazine?
Yes, for sure. So in the special section, it talks very specifically about that. My article also addresses that. So one, let's just be clear. White people made up black people. So people in Africa were a bunch of different nations, a bunch of different groups, and they didn't actually consider it selling their own people into slavery. They were selling
another
it's
tribe.
Right. It's as if you're saying what Italians did to Germany was them doing something to their own people. It wasn't. It's different.
It's still fucked up.
Right.
But they are.
It's very messed up, but it's not
they're
people
not
selling their own
right.
people.
They see them as different people.
But also, the difference was the type of slavery. Slavery is wrong, period, clearly. But the type of slavery that they were selling other Africans in, they didn't understand it. Because what what white Europeans invented was a system of racialized slavery, which did not exist before. It was permanent. You were born into it, you would die into it, and people would live into it for generations, where slavery before had been conditional. You were a war captive, or you were having to pay off a debt, but it wasn't something that all of your children, all of your progeny for 300 years would be born into slavery. And it also was not chattel. So it wasn't about denying that these were human beings and treating them literally as property.
Removing their names, their culture, their spirituality, their language, everything.
Right. There wasn't a breeding, right? They bred us. They bred us for money. So when people say that, it's really just deflecting. And the other argument I make is all of those other countries were not founded on the idea of individual liberty. All of those other countries were not founded on the idea that we would be the most free, liberatory country the world had ever seen. So that founding paradox is crucial, right? Because when we did that, then we were creating a country that was built on a lie. And there is a difference. What I think is so interesting to me is people want to believe in American exceptionality, except when it comes to slavery. So we're exceptional in every way, but when it comes to slavery, people want to say, well, everybody did it, so it wasn't really a problem.
Right.
Well, you're either exceptional or you're not. So either admit that we were just one of a bunch of slave nations, or admit that, I was about to cuss, but I can't cuss.
Yeah, you can.
I can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or admit that y'all motherfuckers is out here.
I mean, seriously, that you created this very fucked up thing, right? You either have to admit both of those things. And what I'm arguing is, don't feel, if you didn't participate in slavery, which none of us did, I'm not saying you have to feel ashamed of that. But don't deny the legacy and the truth. What you do have to be ashamed of is the decision not to rectify the harm that was done and to continue that harm. And you can look at who is in the White House right now and see that we have not dealt with that legacy, and actually that there are large numbers of white Americans who would rather keep us back in the time when certain people thought America was great, but black and brown people did not.
I mean, even if you try to tackle the conversation that you just had of this country was founded on a lie and black people were dragged here and then built the entire country and then in turn have been villainized for then not being able to ever truly recover, because how could you, from a circumstance that's just not passable. People who are good people, white people who are potentially Democrats, not open racists, still get uncomfortable with that conversation. That moment when you have the conversation, they're like, wait, are you...
But that's just guilt.
And that's why I've always never understood why white guilt gets thrown around like an insult. I always felt like, well, to be white in America is to have certain advantages, and to feel guilty about that is to be human. You know what I'm saying? To feel that, like, do I feel guilt about the fact that when I see police, I don't get nervous, but if Shawnee sees cops, he does? Yeah. Like, I may be able to laugh at it because we're friends, but I know it's fucked up. I'm not scared of police.
Right.
Never have been. I would be more likely to be like, I could get you fired, buddy. Like, that's in me. From growing up in this country, I do not fear that police could hurt me. That I literally cannot identify with that experience. That's a crazy, the idea of someone, me and Shawnee, the exact same age, exact same year, you could never relate to the idea of
and
feeling
then
that
you go
way.
deeper into the psychology of, and you talked about breeding, and fear is also bred into people.
Yes.
Right? The behavior of a black person in America whose lineage leads back to a plantation. There is behavior and how you're supposed to act in certain scenarios. It's taught in the home for your own safety, right? Even your name, even your hair texture and what you're supposed to wear to work and, how you're supposed to dress so that you're not seen or too outspoken or too boisterous or too loud or et cetera, et cetera. That's all bred into black Americans.
Yeah, and as is self-hate and the idea of other people. You're set up in a situation in slavery where everyone's fighting for survival. So everyone next to you is someone who, while you may have love and camaraderie, your number one goal is to survive, which puts people in a terrible situation in this country from the absolute beginning of like you're practically pitted against each other for survival. And I don't know that that's completely gone away when you look at the hood and you see what people's situations and surroundings are. And
well,
then
it's still the conditions, right?
It's the
still
same conditions.
scarcity. It's the scarcity conditions. And when you think, black folks were also indoctrinated into white supremacy because we were told that we needed to be enslaved because we were less civilized, that enslavement was actually good for us. I get this on Twitter all the time. Well, look in Africa. You could be living over there like they do right now. So you should be blessed that we enslaved you, right? So we also buy into these stereotypes that justify slavery. In my essay, I go into the psychology that white people had to develop in order to be okay with the lie, with the hypocrisy.
Yeah, you talk about that a lot.
They have to develop a psychology that justifies it. And the justification is we are innately inferior. The justification is that we don't feel pain the same. So that comes out in the science and the ongoing health disparities, because if you believe, like, if you whip black people and it doesn't hurt as bad as it whips you, then you can get away with it mentally, that we can't be raped, right? So it's okay to rape black women. It's okay to enslave your own children. There is a psychosis that has to develop to justify this.
Because otherwise, even you talk about this a lot, even the people who were a part of it could not, because people aren't inherently evil, they couldn't accept the idea you were doing this to human beings. So they're like, no, don't worry. They're not humans.
That's
Look,
right.
they're not.
No, but even when
so
you
don't
go
have to feel
back,
bad.
right?
That's
I
right.
remember there was a statue somewhere of some gynecologist that was like
Yeah,
celebrated.
it was up at Central Park.
Right, and when you really look at the history, this man experimented on black women. Like
with no
literally.
anesthetic, even though anesthetic was available,
No,
he didn't use it because he also wanted to
yes.
see how we responded to pain.
Yes, like literally tortured and experimented on black women. And I'm like, and we're supposed to celebrate this?
Yes.
Like any kind of scientific, like any health, methods that we have now is because they were experimented on black women just to see their reactions.
But this is
It's
also the
sick.
way that we're taught to think, right? So yes, the first 10 of the 12 presidents were enslavers, but that's a side issue, right? So we don't really want to talk about the fact that they built their wealth by operating slave labor camps. It's the same thing that goes into the idea of building a statue to a man where the only reason we even know his name is because he experimented on enslaved women, but we only care that he innovated gynecology as a field.
Right.
So we're constantly asked to erase this legacy of slavery. And even here in New York City, Wall Street is because, enslaved people were sold on the wall right there. But that history is erased when we think about Wall Street. The entire financial district is built on because New York bankers and insurers were providing the mortgages to purchase enslaved people and insuring the bodies of enslaved people. But in the North, we can have this sense of racial innocence because we say, we abolished slavery early. But we were still making money off the institution. And I don't know, how old are you? 40s, I'm assuming?
44.
What we forget is we are part of the first generation of black Americans in the history of the country who were born into a nation where we have full legal rights, where it was not legal to discriminate against us. The first generation, the last civil rights law was passed in 1968. I was born in 1976. So we don't stop at slavery, which is also the myth, is that slavery ended in 1865, get over it. We entered 100 years of legal apartheid in this country where it was legal to discriminate against people of African descent in every aspect of American life. And that just ended 2 generations ago. So to expect that we have somehow purged ourselves of that legacy, it's ridiculous. It's not even naive. It's intentional.
Even if there hadn't been Jim Crow and 100 years of systematic racism, that argument still gets me so angry of get over it. It's 1865. If 2 of us started a race and you got to start it halfway through and I started at the original starting point and then when it ended you were celebrating, I'm like, that's bullshit. And they're like, get over it. The race is over, bro. And it's like, but you cheated the entire time.
Right. Jews celebrate Passover and they talk about slavery during Passover. And they're talking about enslaved Jews
thousands of years ago.
Egypt.
Yes.
Right.
No one would ever fix their lips
Never.
to tell Jews to get over slavery. The Holocaust is more recent, so obviously people ain't saying that. But nobody would ever fix their lips.
No,
to
and
say
Passover is such an important story that like we celebrate, so intensely. And you read the story every year. It's like we have to know what this story is. And in America, our story of slavery, which is an inherently American story, we're uncomfortable talking about it.
Right. Well, we can feel like the victors or we were on the right side when we talk about World War II.
Right.
Even though, well.
Yeah, exactly. Not always.
But we can feel that way, right? That's why you had a Holocaust Museum in the United States before you had a National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is like the very last museum built on the mall. There's a reason for that.
But Germany
need to have this
had their
racial
Holocaust
innocence.
Museum. Germany built a Holocaust Museum.
But you also wouldn't go to a concentration camp in Germany and have a wedding. Right? You also wouldn't have statues of the people who initiated racial cleansing. But black folks all across this country have to go to schools named after enslavers. Yep. They have, people are having plantation weddings. You can rent out and stay in a slave cabin. That just shows we have been unable to deal with it. I hadn't heard this term before, but a historian told me the other day there was a denazification of Germany, right? It was a purging of everything that had to do with that, and we haven't done that here. But I think part of the reason why it's harder for us is, as you know, there's hardly any Jews left in Germany. Mm-hmm. You can deal with that history a little better when you don't have to look at the objects of every atrocity you committed. But here in America, every time they see black people, they know why we're here. And every time they see black people, they're reminded that they are not the great nation that they say they are. And because of that, I feel like we are constantly being punished. There's this continual punish because we actually had the audacity to survive slavery.
It's like the woman who has to like raise the child that her husband had out of wedlock, but constantly when you see that child is a reminder, no matter what, that something fucked up happened.
Yes.
And then it's driven home in this way too, where white people are scared of black neighborhoods. They see black people on the news and are like, see?
Yeah, but that continues to make it okay to kill us in the street. That's why.
Well, and still almost justify slavery.
That's why even during the black.
Well, you create the conditions and then you blame the people for responding to the conditions that have been created. I mean, I hear all the time, just, get yourselves together and like do what you're supposed to do. And my question is, when is white America going to do what it's supposed to do? When will white America actually fix the problems that white Americans have created, as opposed to always telling black folks, just work harder, try harder, overcome every obstacle in your way.
That's already happened.
And when folks somehow fail to do that,
that's already happened.
It's a sign of our pathology.
We've overcome every obstacle that has been put in our way. I often on the radio will say, y'all have tried everything. We're not really afraid of anything else y'all want to try.
Right. The fact that there are 40 million of us when there were 4 million of us at the end of the Civil War speaks to the resiliency. When I was younger, I used to think when people said black people are the strongest people in the world, I thought that was hyperbolic. But the more I studied slavery and you think like to have survived the march from the central part of Africa to the coast, to have survived living in those slave castles for 2 months, to have survived the Middle Passage, and then to have survived slavery and Jim Crow, you actually have to be pretty fucking strong. Like, that actually might be true. That resilience that we're never given credit for. We're never given credit for not just folding, but for constantly, from the second we got here, having to fight. I talk in my piece how we fought in every war this country has ever fought. Wars abroad, We're fighting for other people to be free abroad and then having to come home and fight our own countrymen to try to be free here. No one else has had to do that. That experience is almost singular to Black Americans, and we're never given credit for it. I think the reason, in some ways, conservatives, who most of them haven't read a single word in this anyway, are opposed to the idea is it centers finally Black people in the story of America instead of making us marginal, and they're just not used to that.
The 1619 Project. We will be in Harlem tomorrow on 125th Street, and we will have a lot of these magazines to give away. I was surprised you guys had that many of it for us. I think we got like a whole van load.
But I told you they're giving them away to anyone, I thought, who academically requests them, no?
Yeah, so we fundraised, and I personally fundraised to print a lot of extra copies because I did not want only the typical Time subscriber to get access to what we were doing, and understanding that the typical Time subscriber
is white and rich.
white and affluent. This is true. So we have. We ran out of copies to sell right now, but we have a lot of copies that we're trying to make sure are really getting into the communities who are most impacted by this legacy.
Really
and I
important.
thank you guys for helping us get some of these
Tomorrow will be
projects
Our
out.
pleasure.
Yeah, I think 125th Street in Harlem is a good place to
Right,
bring
Perfect.
these.
State building,
Yeah.
right?
That's a beautiful thing to me.
Right.
Yeah. I thank you and love you for this work. I
Yeah, this
know
is
it was
amazing.
Thank you.
definitely had to be heart-wrenching, to say the least, to delve
Cried a
this
lot
deep.
making this
Yeah.
for sure.
And I encourage everybody to understand that, America is probably not ever going to heal, as you pointed out. And a lot of it is tied to the fact that most people come to this country only for selfish reasons. America is a place that is selfish. You came here for a better life for you and your family, which usually means money. And if you were able to get access to America, as you pointed out also in the conversation, you were probably of a lighter hue most of the time, which is a whole other conversation, because you see what's happening at the border. You see how they treat Haitians. You see how they treat a lot of darker complected people when they try to come to this nation. And this president currently is being outspoken about, why don't more Swedish people want to come to America?
They're like, we're good.
He wants to buy Greenland.
Right.
Right.
Wants to buy
Right.
Greenland, right? But there's only 50,000 white people that live there. But
Yeah,
anyway.
it's perplexing. He got turned down anyway.
But anyway, I really appreciate you, and I hope people want to do this work. 1619 Project, New York Times Magazine. Nikole Hannah-Jones, give it
Thank
up one
you.
time. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.